Hi collectors, it's Carly and I'm back again with another edition of What I Found at Fanboys. So today is a very special video for me because we're going to be looking at something that is actually a bit of a personal grail for me, and since I got it home and really have spent some time with it, has become, quite frankly, the centerpiece of my entire collection. I am a huge Spider-Man fan. I've been collecting comic books for years, and this is the type of piece that when you see it like I did at Fanboys, you sort of look at it, know that you want it, and maybe take some time to decide if you're going to pull the trigger. So I looked at it over a couple of weeks. I would visit it and I took some photographs of it and sort of slept on it and finally decided that it's very meaningful to me and I really wanted it, so I picked it up and now it's home. Today we're going to be looking at my CBCS graded Todd McFarlane Spider-Man Torment #1, autographed by Stan Lee. This is a very special piece to me for a number of reasons. First of all, as a collector, as an adult collector, I grew up in the Midwest and there weren't a lot of big conventions near me when I was a child, when I was really starting to get into comics. So I never really got to go to a lot of big conventions. I didn't start hitting conventions until later in my life, and unfortunately, by the time I was old enough and financially able enough to go to whichever conventions I chose to, Stan Lee had already passed. And I just sort of felt like I had really missed the boat because he was so wonderful with his fans. He would always spend time with people. He was so warm and friendly. He would sign whatever you had for him and really create moments with you. And I totally regretted that I missed that time. And I kind of thought that the boat had just sailed for me on that. So when I saw that this piece was signed by Stan Lee and not Todd McFarlane, I really sort of knew immediately that it was a piece that I had to have. And in addition to that, Spider-Man being one of my favorite characters of all time, Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man changed the character for me. It was sort of the first time that he was depicted the way I felt that he should be depicted, as a spider-type character. Todd McFarlane's artwork is beyond reproach, in my opinion, in every respect. Everything about this character was just absolutely beautiful, and this 5 comic book series sort of just paved the way for a whole new era of Spider-Man, and because I love him so much, this is a really seminal piece for me, and everything about it just suited my collection and my tastes and everything that I would want in my collection, so I knew I had to have it. So today I'm going to be talking about graded comics, purchasing graded comics, the different companies that grade comics, what you should be looking for, what the different points mean, and how to buy graded comics for your own collection. So this particular piece was graded by CBCS. There are 3 primary bodies that grade comics. They are CBCS, CGC, and JCX. On this title card here, it will tell you all about the book that you have in hand, but it will give you a score, it will tell you about the book, it will tell you who is featured in the book, the title of the book, the company. All of those 3 organizations will generally provide that information for you. But what's really interesting is how much the grading of each of these 3 companies can vary. So I watched a really fascinating video on a grading process with a Batman #1. I'm going to share that link in the description, where a particular collector sent in the same issue of Batman #1 and got 3 wildly different scores from all 3 of these grading companies. And before he shows you what those companies graded it, he gives a really outstanding look at the comic book itself. So the reason this video has some value to me is that it really shows you kind of what a book looks like at each score, and then you can sort of Google the price of a comic like that. Now, when we're looking at a Batman #1, we're obviously looking at something in the tens of thousands of dollars, but people grade all kinds of comics. There are key issues in every single run of every single series in the world, and depending on the preference of the collector, those things can have real value, and having them graded and certified or autographed can really be a meaningful addition to someone's collection. So when we're looking at a CGC comic, typically what you'll find is that their turnaround time is a lot longer, but they seem to be a little bit more generous with some things like the colors of the pages, and I don't believe that CGC will grade comic books, will verify signatures, so that's something definitely to think about. If you send them a comic book that just has a signature on it without any type of verification, they will grade your comic book, but they won't consider that signature as a part of the value of the comic. So there's a whole process you need to go through with CGC, either in person at a convention to get a signature verified and then immediately send it from that point to CGC. They have agents that will do that for you. CBCS uses a verification individual, like a verification company, that will look at your autograph and determine if it is a verified signature or not. On my comic here, you can see that it is a verified signature from Stan Lee. But this is something that some people may not know. Grading can be expensive, not outrageously expensive, but if you're getting a comic book graded thinking that you're going to add value to it with a signature, make sure that before anyone writes anything on the pages of your book, that you have someone from CGC or CBCS. These are the big two, really, the Marvel and DC, if you will, of grading companies. We'll talk about the other in just a second. But make sure that you have someone who can verify that signature on site before you send your book off to get verified. Otherwise, you might just damage a unique book and not really add value to it with the signature. So the other company, they are a lot looser on the standards that they use for grading. So for example, in the video that I'm linking in the description where we look at the Batman #1, we're looking at something that when I looked at it, I was thinking around a 7 or a 7.5. We got a CGC grading of much lower than that. Well, about a point lower than that. I didn't want to give it all away, but we'll just go ahead and tell you. You can still watch the video. It's great. But they gave a score of about 5.5. And then CBCS gave a score of about 6. So those really were fair. I feel like I was kind of close. I was grading it a little bit higher, but I don't really have much to do with Golden Age comics in my collection. Then JCX came out and gave it an 8.0. So you can see the problem that creates is that it really sort of muddies the waters when you're looking at the market, trying to determine the value of a comic from an objective perspective. So the more objective, linear perspectives that sort of coincide a bit more are CGC and CBCS. Those two companies, while there will be a variance because they're different companies that use different standards, tend to be much more in the same wheelhouse. CGC has a much longer turnover time, while CBCS is much more stringent, generally, people find. So they're much more hardcore about what it takes to reach a certain score, which can be really good for you. In my case, I feel like it worked out really well at a 9.2 on a scale of 10. Or if you think you have a book that's not quite as good as they think it is, it could end up being not so great for you. Which is why my #1 piece of advice, and you can scour the internet if you're interested in investing in comics, really look into that because it is a little bit more complicated than I think some people believe or understand that it is. You have to have a lot of knowledge and put a lot of time and work and effort into it. There are stories out there always of somebody's uncle's cousin's brother found their grandfather's long boxes and it was worth millions of dollars. And those stories are so much fun, and as collectors we love to think about just getting in those stacks and finding the treasures there. But truly, those kinds of things aren't happening all that often. If you want to speculate in comics, it's kind of a full-time job that you have to have money invested, you have to know about all kinds of different books, you have to follow storylines, you have to follow the market, you have to understand what's happening with distribution. There's a lot that goes into it, and it can be great. Some people make a lot of money at it, but for me, it kind of drains the love of the hobby because I'm not just enjoying the books that I love. So if you want to look at collecting graded comics, comics that have value, my #1 recommendation is to buy the comics that are meaningful to you. I would not recommend going out and looking just for the most expensive book. Or for instance, for me, that Batman #1 is a beautiful book. Now that's a book, like I said, that's going to be in the tens of thousands of dollars. But if I had that money to invest, I would be getting it. And the hope would be that I would be turning it around to make more money, but that kind of turnaround is going to take years, possibly decades. For example, Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead #1 was published in, I believe, 2005 or 2006. A #1 today, at the time it sold for $4.99. An original #1 first print today will go for around $2,000. So when you're looking at the increase in value from 2005 to 2022, it's taking you about 17 years to make $2,000. So you would have to wait a long time and have a lot of books to sell in order to make a living per se. So my advice is to buy books that matter to you. For instance, I have all of the Walking Dead comics. I have all of the compendiums. I have all of the trade paperbacks because I love The Walking Dead and I would never ever part with those books. I genuinely can't think of a situation where I would be compiling my Walking Dead collection and thinking about how to make money off of it. And that's how I feel about this comic book. While numerically it is one of the most valuable comic books in my collection, the reason that I have it is not to make money, but because it makes my collection more sentimentally attached to me. So it really is a piece that matters to me, and for me that's what collecting is all about. I think that when you get into looking at these things to try to make financial moves, you'll end up making more missteps and ultimately sort of lose the love of what brought you into the hobby to begin with. So adding a graded comic to your collection can be a really, really wonderful thing to do. For me, this is one of the happiest weeks of my life adding this. But take a lot of time to do your research before you decide to grade a comic. Grading is really set up for businesses ultimately to send lots of comics at once, so it can get really pricey for one book for one guy. But if you find a graded comic and you just know it's the piece for you, there really is nothing like the feeling of bringing it home. And I hope that everyone who is involved in the hobby gets to have that experience. I will be sharing more of my graded comics on Instagram. And if you have any questions, thoughts, or want to tell us about your comics, I'll be sharing my email in the description. And I would love to hear about your graded comics, your speculative comic investments, and anything you'd like to share about the 3 grading organizations. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'm loving making these videos for Fanboys, and as we go, we're refining the process. So let us know what you'd like to see, and we will always do our best to make sure that there's a video that's tailored just for you. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you again soon because we know everyone collects something. Bye guys.